Okay, so you've got a new book out, and the book is called 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos. And, one of the key points in the book is life is suffering, right? And clearly, I think guys...
And malevolence. Because the suffering's not enough,
we need a little bonus on top of that.
Yeah.
So,
we need to inflict it. Yeah.
Obviously in my old line of work, we got to see that, and we got to see it all the time. Two things. Number one, where does that come from? And you don't need to spend a bunch of time on that because you've talked about that so much. But more important to me, what happens when people miss that point?
Well, the suffering seems to be built in some sense, and it's a very difficult thing to understand fully, because the fundamental question is, does being justify suffering? It's something like that. And there's this old idea, I read this, it was a Jewish idea, it's kind of a riddle, and so it's a riddle about the nature of God. And so the riddle runs, what does a being who's omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, so those are the three classical attributes of God, lack? I think, well, that's nothing, obviously. It's no limitation. Mm-hmm. And so that was the explanation for why God created everything, but more particularly why God created man. It's that there's something about limitation that adds to completeness. Maybe because it provides something to struggle against. It's something like that. And in the book, in 12 Rules for Life, I talk about what happened to Superman in the 1980s. It's like Superman got so powerful that you could bounce hydrogen bombs off his chest, and he could move planets. It's like, and then he got boring at the same time, because what are you going to do to him? Nothing. Is like,
right.
He can just solve every problem instantly. Well, there's no story there. And you might say, well, who cares if there's a story? And that's a reasonable objection. Maybe there should just be no story at all, right? That's the Mephistophelian objection to life. There should be no story at all. But maybe that's not the right answer. Maybe it's better to have being, even if it requires limitation, even if the limitation necessitates suffering, even if the limitation and the suffering necessitate evil, and that's a separate issue. Perhaps there's a way of maneuvering through that, a pathway that makes that all not only acceptable, let's say at least acceptable, that would be a good start, but fully justifiable, something that you would voluntarily accept if you had the opportunity. Nietzsche sort of cottoned onto that in some sense with his idea of the eternal return. He said you should try to live each moment of your life so that if you had to live that moment recurring for eternity, that you would find that desirable. It's like, it's a high standard, man. So, but there's a very interesting point there, which is that maybe you can say that despite the suffering and malevolence, this is worth it. And I think people have experiences like that in their life, and you can have more experiences if you live your life, I would say, if you're on the proper path, then maybe your life can consist of almost nothing but experiences like that. Now, I say that knowing full well that people get cut off at the knees, and that life can be very arbitrary and hard, and that everyone is prone to the negative consequences of deceit and betrayal, all of those things. I mean, the book 12 Rules for Life in some sense is a very dark book, but it's not exactly, because the darker the darkness, the brighter the light appears. It's something like that. And, you say, well, no, life's not so bad and you can be happy. And I think, no, life really is bad. It's really bad. And no matter how bad you think it is, it's actually worse than that. You can't really get to the bottom of how terrible things can get. People who have post-traumatic stress disorder know that. Mm-hmm. They've hit something so bad that they cannot live with it. They have no idea how to live with it. And it hurts them, not just psychologically, but physiologically as well. It's very difficult to recover. So they have a sense of how bad it can be, and then they can hardly live with it. But I would say, despite that, and I would say also that this is the central idea in 12 Rules for Life, is that despite that bottomless horror in some sense, there is a way of being that's powerful enough to both transcend and justify that in some sense. And that has to do with the decision to act as if it would be better if things were better. That's the first thing. And you think, well, that's easy. I'd like things to be better. It's no, wait a second. There's hatred in your heart, and there's resentment in your soul, and there's bitterness at your position in the world, and there's the sense that you're a victim, and there's the anger that goes along with that, and the desire to hurt. Like, you have all of that, and maybe you have it in spades. Maybe it's mostly what you are. And because of that, you do not want things to be better. You want to spread some misery out of spite. And that's what chapter 6 is about, right? Put your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. It's about people like the Columbine High School shooters and exactly what they were motivated by, because I understand what they were motivated by. And so to wish that things were better means that you have to make a real decision that despite all the flaws of existence, the suffering and the malevolence, that it's best not to become embittered by that and to work for the betterment of everyone. You, for sure. Your family, for sure. Your community, but perhaps even your enemies. You know, if you have any sense, you wish your enemies well. That doesn't mean you wish them victory. It doesn't mean you don't think they're wrong. None of that. It means that it would be better if the world was set up so that they didn't have to suffer miserably and futilely and evilly as well. That would be better. And so then you can aim at that. You know, and the best way to aim at that is, well, first of all, to aim at it, to actually sort yourself out and think, okay, well, if I could have things the way I wanted them to be, that's what I would want, right? And that takes a lot of psychological organization before you can state that without what would you say, without holding anything back, you know, because there's that part of you, that bitter part that wants vengeance and wants to wreak havoc. That's there. It's hard to constrain that. And then, well, the other part along with this, as well as aiming at the highest good that's attainable, let's say, is to also decide that you're going to speak the truth in that endeavor and to risk that, you know, and there's that. And because I think those are the things that help you orient yourself properly. That's the message on the Sermon on the Mount, by the way, which is aim at the highest good that you can conceive of and act and tell the truth in that pursuit, right? The other element there is to focus on the day once you've aligned yourself with the heavenly star, right? Aim high and then focus on the day. That's very good advice, because it also imbues everything you do in your daily life with significance. So why am I doing this? To avoid hell. That's a good one. Let's start with that. It's like to avoid hell. And if you have any imagination at all, if you lived in the world at all, if you're not naive, you know what that means. It's not just the hell that you encounter, it's the hell that you foolishly produce around yourself and are then responsible for. That's a perfectly good sort of hell. So you want to avoid that for sure. And maybe you want to dare risking making things better. It's like that'll imbue your life with significance. And that significance, you know, one of the things I've learned, I would say, over the last 25 years is that there's always been a mythological idea or an idea in literature and philosophy that there was a shining path, you know, that you could walk down. And modern cynical people believe that sort of meaning, the meaning that would be obtained by walking on that path, is somehow illusory or arbitrary. And I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever that that's true. I think that sense of meaningful engagement that what is revealed to you when you're in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, that sense of deep engagement, that loss of self-consciousness, that feeling that things are worthwhile, that deep-seated feeling that things are worthwhile, that's the most real thing. I think the neurobiological evidence suggests that. I really do believe that. And so we're in a fortunate time in some sense because we can look at those old metaphorical ideas of the shining path, let's say, the golden path forward, and we can say, yeah, that's actually real. It's real. And that's something. And then that's so what's so cool about that, in my estimation, is that, and this is why 12 Rules for Life is actually an optimistic book, is like the darkness is real, but the light is stronger. It's like, wow, could that be true? Could that possibly be true? I think it's true. So that's a good thing to know, man, that might be true.
And you know, when I was talking about my friend in the beginning of this podcast, that's why I was talking about it, because it was a guy who had every reason to be to be negative and to be dark and to look at the world and just say this is hell and it's not worth it. But instead, what he really did was want to take care of his friends.
I talk about a woman in my book as someone I met as a client when I was just beginning my psychotherapeutic practice, and she just blew me away. I've never forgotten her. So she had a horrible life. She was unattractive, uneducated, no career, unemployed, so shy you can't even imagine it. Like, you've met someone shy and anxious, it's like they weren't in the same universe as this woman. She was so shy that she couldn't walk up to people without looking at the ground, hunching over and shielding her eyes. So that's how she approached people on the street. And she looked like a homeless person as well. And so and she came to the behavior therapy unit that I was working at, and hypothetically for treatment. And so what we started doing was seeing if we could get her to stand up a bit and look people in the eye more normally, so that people wouldn't respond to her as if she was so peculiar, you know. So we were trying to change her behavior. But I started talking to her, and she told me a little bit about her life. It's like she lived where she lived. Her mother I think she lived with her aunt, who was like a violent, schizophrenic alcoholic who had religious delusions and constantly accused her of being possessed by the devil. And she had a really violent and abusive alcoholic boyfriend who used to mistreat this woman. So that was like home life. It's like, yeah. And she had been an inpatient in this hospital, the Douglas Hospital, and that was in the 1980s. And the Douglas Hospital was a huge hospital, about the size of a university campus, and it had a lot of inpatients, but they were all let out on the streets when medication became widely available and when deinstitutionalization was the norm. But there was a subset of them who couldn't be deinstitutionalized, and these were people that you can hardly imagine. So I used to go in the underground corridors in the Douglas Hospital, because it's very cold in Montreal, so there are underground corridors collecting the buildings, and down there would be vending machines and places for people to sit. And it was like walking through Dante's Inferno, because these were people who were so damaged. You know, they'd been in a psychiatric institution for maybe 2 or 3 decades. They could not be released no matter what, even though that's what the hospital was trying to do. And so it was like Diane Arbus used to go across the United States and photograph strange people, and she has a whole collection of her photographs. They're quite arresting and shocking, and it was like walking through Diane Arbus's universe, you know. And so those were the inpatients, and she had been an inpatient from time to time, but was well enough so she could also go out. And it turned out she didn't actually want treatment. She had this dog. She used to take it for walks, and so that was her source of enjoyment, right? And she thought, I really like this dog, and I really like taking it for walks, and maybe I could go to the Douglas Hospital and find one of these inpatients and take him out for a walk. Maybe that would be a good thing for him. And so the reason she had come to the behavior therapy clinic wasn't to treat all of her problems. And like, this woman had problems, man. Everything about her life was a problem in ways that like a normal person just cannot begin to understand, you know, unless they're in one of those situations in their life where everything is collapsing around them. And what she decided was, well, there's someone worse off than me that I could help. It's like, she just absolutely blew me away, you know. This poor woman, she had nothing going for her. Well, I guess she did, because she had this nobility of spirit that was absolutely indomitable. I never forgot that. It just blew me away.
Does that somehow lead her into her situation in a way, if she's so noble and she wants to help her aunt that's all crazy and accusing her of that, and she wants to help prop up her boyfriend that's violent and crazy?
No, I don't think so. I don't think she wanted any of that. She was just one of these people. It's like, you know, you can put someone in a situation that's so dire that there's virtually no escape from it. Like, I've seen people in my clinical practice for whom things around them have collapsed so badly that there's just no fixing it. You fix one thing and 2 other things break, and then you fix those and 3 other things break. There's just no bottom. And those are often families that have had multi-generational problems, deeply rooted. The whole community is pathologized. The entire family structure is demolished. Their people don't have any marketable skills, and they haven't for generations. The whole situation is complicated by drug and alcohol abuse and heavily biologically influenced insanity of one form or another, usually conjoined with relatively low cognitive ability. It's just hell no matter which way you turn. And I didn't see her as a contributor to that. I mean, I'm sure she made her mistakes like everyone else, but she certainly wasn't playing martyr or victim. She didn't come into the clinic to complain to begin with, which is like, she was just telling me these were the situation that she lived in. That isn't what she was there for. It's just that we thought she had come for treatment, so we were doing a background analysis, an intake interview, and found out all these things. It's like, any one of those problems is enough to bring most people's lives to a shuddering halt. And yet that was her vision. So the reason she had come to the hospital, and she didn't just come to the behavior therapy clinic, she'd gone around pestering administrators in the hospital to let her take the long-term inmates out for a walk. Now, they wouldn't do it for all sorts of reasons, but that didn't stop her from thinking it was a good idea. And it actually was a good idea. This was a practical idea.
Right.
Like, she could have taken people out on the grounds, because the grounds were huge, and walked them with the dog. And it would have been fine for them.
Was there such a thing as pet therapy in 1985?
No,
so
not
she
at
was
that
sort
point.
of ahead of her.
Yeah, well, right,
She was ahead of
exactly.
it.
Exactly. But she had enough wherewithal to notice that she liked the dog and the dog liked her. And that was a good thing, right? A little bit of love in the world there, and that there was nothing wrong with taking the dog for a walk, and that was kind of harmless. And why not have someone along?
It made her feel good. She thought, well, maybe it'll make this other person feel good as well.
Exactly. So, you just got to shake your head. Well, that's when I really learned to begin with, deeply, that there's no correlation between intelligence and wisdom. And that's actually the case, technically. Like, if you're smart, you can just be, like, you can be smart and good, but you can be smart and bad. It's
That's it. Well, we used to say, okay, so we'd get these guys coming in the SEAL teams. That would be, for a while, we were recruiting for the officer candidates. We were recruiting these guys that were, they went to Ivy League schools and they were off the charts and 1,600 on their SATs, and then they were the captain of this, and they were just these really high achievers. And we found that not all of them, but certainly some of them couldn't really function as a leader in the job, because they just didn't have the wisdom to pull it off. But they couldn't make the personal connections. They couldn't develop the relationships.
Well, leadership's a complicated thing, and it doesn't boil down just to intelligence.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like none of them were, because some of them were obviously outstanding, incredible leaders. But there were some of them that would be the same kind of recruit, but they just would be missing whatever piece that was.
Well, intelligence and character are definitely not the same thing. They're not the same thing. I mean, all things considered, if you're going to pick one of two leaders, I would pick the smarter leader over the duller leader if all other things were equal, because someone who's more intelligent can strategize more rapidly and can handle more variables, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps can even handle handle a more rapid rate of transformation as well. And sometimes that's actually crucial. But character and intelligence they're clearly not the same thing. And character is actually, I don't think anything trumps character. Character is everything. So